Tom Bradford stood on the observation deck of Kepler Station, watching the auction list scroll across the holographic screen in front of him. He was broke. Not struggling to pay bills broke, but genuinely, completely out of money broke. The kind of broke that made you consider selling your teeth or your organs on the black market. 10 years ago, he'd been a decorated marine mechanic, the kind of guy who could fix anything with an engine and a wrench. Then came the discharge, dishonorable, messy, the kind of thing that followed you around like a bad smell. The reason didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that Tom Bradford was stuck on this asteroid colony with nothing but his skills and a reputation that preceded him in the worst possible way. He'd been taking odd jobs for the past 2 years, fixing cargo haulers and mining equipment for people who paid him just enough to rent a bunk in the worker district. It wasn't a life. It was just existing, one day bleeding into the next. The auctioneer's voice crackled through the station speakers, announcing the next lot. Property designation 779 Alpha. Abandoned structure, approximately 200 years old, previous owner records unclear. Colonial Authority has deemed it salvage property with no liability to the purchaser. Opening bid 50 credits. Tom almost laughed. 50 credits. He had exactly 63 credits to his name, which he'd been saving to buy a week's worth of decent food. Real food, not the synthetic paste they called nutrition blocks. But something about the description caught his attention. Abandoned structure. 200 years old. That meant it was old. And old things sometimes had valuable parts. He put in his bid. Nobody else did. The auctioneer seemed almost surprised when the gavel came down. Tom Bradford was now the owner of an abandoned alien structure on the far side of Kepler Colony, in a region so remote that most people forgot it existed. He transferred his 63 credits to the Colonial Authority and received a deed and access codes that probably didn't even work anymore. It took him 3 days to get out there. He hitched a ride on a mining transport that was heading in that direction, then walked the last 2 kilometers across rust-colored dust and black rock. The structure appeared gradually through the haze, a massive dome of some kind of metallic material that had turned a mottled gray-green over the centuries. It was huge, easily the size of a small warehouse, and it was clearly not human-made. The angles were wrong. The proportions didn't follow any engineering standard Tom recognized. When he got close, he could see the entrance, a massive curved door that was slightly ajar, dust piled against its edges like it hadn't moved in decades. Tom pulled it open, and a groan of ancient machinery echoed through the structure. Dust billowed in the light from his helmet lamp. Inside, it was like stepping into a museum of the impossible. The space was enormous, with high ceilings that disappeared into shadow. Rows of what looked like workbenches lined the walls, covered with tools and equipment that Tom couldn't even begin to identify. There were panels of some kind of material that might have been metal or might have been something else entirely. And everywhere, absolutely everywhere, there were data terminals. Wall-mounted screens, ceiling-mounted displays, terminals built into the benches themselves. All of them dark and dead. Tom's pulse quickened. Dead systems could sometimes be restarted. And if they could be restarted, there might be information inside them. Information could be valuable. He moved deeper into the structure, his boots crunching on the dust-covered floor. At the far end of the main chamber, he found what looked like a control center. A larger terminal, more complex than the others, sat on a raised platform. Tom approached it carefully and reached out to touch the activation panel. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, without warning, the entire terminal blazed to life. Holographic displays burst into existence around him, casting eerie blue and green light across the space. Text scrolled across screens in languages Tom didn't recognize, then slowly shifted as his translator device, a standard colonial implant, began processing the data. The system was activating, pulling power from some kind of backup source that had apparently been maintaining a minimal charge for 2 centuries. The first log appeared in front of him, a shimmering holographic recording of something that might have been a person, though it was hard to tell. The being was speaking, and Tom's translator rendered the words in his ear. Day 47 of the containment cycle. All seals holding. The specimen remains dormant in the lower vault. Maintenance protocols completed. Secondary backup systems active. Tom frowned. Specimen? Containment? This wasn't just any structure. As he dug deeper into the logs, more fragments appeared. Containment breach detected in Sector 3. Specimen protocol activated. And again, the same phrase that made his skin prickle. The shepherd. The shepherd is restless. The shepherd must not be disturbed. Tom Bradford stood alone in that vast chamber, surrounded by ancient holographic warnings, and felt something deep in his gut shift. He'd bought this place for salvage money, hoping for scrap metal and maybe some rare components. He bought something else entirely. Tom set up a makeshift camp inside the structure. He found a relatively clean corner of the facility, cleared away the dust, and laid out his bedroll and supplies. He wasn't planning to leave. Not yet. Not until he understood what he'd actually bought. The first week was frustrating. The archive systems were vast, far more complex than anything Tom had ever encountered. He spent hours just trying to navigate the interface, learning how the alien filing system worked. It wasn't organized in ways that made sense to human logic. There were no dates as Tom understood them, no clear chronological order. Instead, the records seemed to be organized by something he eventually realized was maintenance cycles. Every log was tagged with a cycle number, and he began to see the pattern. Cycle 1 was ancient. Cycle 5742 was more recent. He started downloading everything to portable data drives, worried that the aging systems might fail before he could copy the entire archive. The downloads took days. Gigabytes upon gigabytes of information, spanning what his calculations suggested was roughly 15,000 years of continuous operation. By the second week, Tom had basic translations of thousands of entries. And what he found made him stop eating properly and stop sleeping well. This place wasn't a repair shop. It never had been. It was a prison. More specifically, it was a maintenance facility for a prison. A very, very old prison that had been continuously staffed and maintained by multiple alien species across 15 millennia. The entries all followed a similar pattern: status reports, maintenance logs, equipment checks. Everything routine. Everything designed to keep something contained. Something they called the Shepherd. Tom read through logs written by beings whose names and species he couldn't pronounce. Some entries were formal and clinical. Containment field integrity at 97%. No anomalies detected. Others grew increasingly urgent over time. Specimen activity increasing. Recommend reinforcement of primary seals. And as he went deeper into the archive, newer entries that were only a few thousand years old in galactic terms, showed clear signs of worry. The Shepherd has become aware of our presence. It tests the boundaries daily now. The seals hold, but we are concerned about long-term degradation. We have implemented new protocols. All staff must remain vigilant. The Shepherd grows restless. Do not abandon your post under any circumstances. The more recent entries were the ones that truly disturbed Tom. They were written in multiple languages, as if different species were taking turns documenting the same events from their own perspectives. The overlapping translations made his head hurt, but the message was consistent. Something was wrong. Something was changing. One entry, dated what Tom calculated to be approximately 50 years in the past, was written in a language his translator struggled with for several minutes before finally rendering it comprehensible. The words appeared on his screen in English, but they were fragmented, urgent, almost desperate. The seals have begun to fail. We do not have the technology to repair them. We have requested assistance from the Protocol Council, but response times are measured in decades. We cannot wait. The Shepherd is aware of the degradation. It is testing the weaknesses. It is learning. And then, in what appeared to be a different hand or voice, another entry immediately followed. The Shepherd grows restless. The seals weaken. We cannot stay. We cannot stay. We cannot stay. The phrase repeated 7 times, each one more frantic than the last. And then the entry stopped completely. Tom pulled up the dates on those final logs. 50 years ago. Exactly 50 years. Not 49, not 51. 50 years to the day all logging activity ceased. There were no evacuation records, no final reports, no explanation. Just a sudden, complete silence that had lasted half a century. He spent an entire night going through every single entry from the last 100 years of operation, trying to piece together what had happened. The facility had been staffed continuously for thousands of years. Multiple species had worked there. They'd all understood that abandoning the post was forbidden. The protocol was clear: maintain containment. Always. No matter what. But 50 years ago they'd left anyway. Tom found one final entry hidden in a subarchive, timestamp barely legible. It was short, just 3 sentences. The Shepherd is conscious. It is aware. Order received: evacuate immediately. Tom sat in the darkness of the facility, surrounded by the ghosts of 1,000 years of maintenance work, and felt a chill run down his spine. Whatever the Shepherd was, whatever it had been locked away for, the people who'd built this facility, people or beings with technology far beyond anything humanity had achieved, had deemed it so dangerous that they'd maintained its prison for 15,000 years. They'd never, ever considered leaving. Until 50 years ago. When they did leave, they left in such a hurry that they didn't even leave a message explaining why. Tom had been living in the facility for 3 weeks when he made the decision to do something that would change everything. He had a portable data terminal, military grade, one of the few valuable things he'd kept from his Marine days, and he decided to cross-reference the alien records with human historical databases. It was a long shot. The facility's logs mentioned dozens of species and civilizations, most of which Tom had never heard of. But he was curious. He was also desperately bored and running low on food, so he had nothing but time. He started with the most recent entries, the ones from 50 years ago. The logs mentioned several civilizations by name. The Vex Theory Collective. The Carillion Empire. The Threshold Guardians. The names meant nothing to Tom, but the database included designations, star systems, galactic coordinates, estimated populations. Tom pulled up human colonial records and began searching. The first hit made him pause. The Vex Theory Collective. According to the alien logs, they'd maintained the facility for approximately 2,000 years before handing it over to the Carillions. The Vex Theory were described in the maintenance records as highly advanced, with technology spanning multiple dimensions. Their final log entry, dated approximately 52 years ago, was one of the frantic ones. The shepherd grows restless. The seals weaken. We cannot stay. Tom searched the human databases for any reference to the Vex Theory. Nothing. Not a single record. No archaeological findings, no cultural artifacts, no radio transmissions, no wreckage. Nothing at all. It was as if they'd never existed. Tom frowned and kept searching. He pulled up every available database. Xenological records, archaeological surveys, trade logs, even old space exploration reports from decades past. The Vex Theory Collective was listed in exactly one place, the alien maintenance logs. Everywhere else in recorded galactic history they simply didn't exist. Tom's hands felt cold. He searched for the Carillion Empire next. Same thing. The logs described them as taking over maintenance operations approximately 3,000 years ago. They had their own entries, their own status reports, their own final desperate plea. The shepherd is aware. But in all of human records, in every database Tom could access, the Carillions were ghosts. No evidence they'd ever existed at all. He tried the Threshold Guardians. The Jinkar Dominion. The Calyx Collective. Over and over, the same pattern repeated. Each civilization appeared prominently in the maintenance logs. Each one had staffed the facility. Each one had left the same final message. And each one was completely absent from every other record in existence. Tom stood up and paced the chamber, his footsteps echoing in the vast space. His mind was racing, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Either the human databases were incomplete, which was possible but seemed unlikely given how comprehensive they were supposed to be, or something else was happening. Something far worse. He opened a star chart and began plotting the coordinates from the alien logs. The civilizations mentioned in the records didn't just disappear from the databases. He cross-referenced their listed home worlds and territories against current galactic maps. Most of the regions they'd occupied were now empty space. Completely empty. No planets, no space stations, no wreckage. Nothing. Just void. A few of the regions had been colonized by other species since. But the dates were important. The human records showed colonization beginning in those areas roughly 50 to 200 years ago. Which meant that the civilizations the logs described had vanished before humans had even arrived in those regions. Tom sat down heavily on one of the ancient benches and stared at the data in front of him. Every single civilization that had maintained this facility was gone. Not just gone, erased. Completely removed from existence as far as any galactic record showed. And each one had left a final message: the shepherd is aware. His stomach twisted. The implication was too horrible to ignore. The shepherd wasn't just a prisoner. It was something that had caused the extinction of multiple advanced civilizations. Not species conflicts. Not wars or plagues or accidents. Multiple, independent, technologically advanced civilizations, each one more advanced than humanity by orders of magnitude, had all disappeared after the same final message. Awareness that the shepherd knew they were there. Tom looked around the facility with new eyes. He wasn't looking at a repair shop. He wasn't even looking at a prison anymore. He was looking at a grave. A monument to lost civilizations. A warning written in the absence of entire worlds. And the thing they'd been so desperate to keep contained, the thing called the shepherd, was still here. Still locked away behind that sealed vault in the basement. Still, according to the 50-year-old logs, very much alive. Tom realized something else, something that made his blood run cold. The facility had been abandoned 50 years ago. The last maintenance crew had left in a hurry. They'd sealed the vault and evacuated. But they hadn't destroyed the facility. They hadn't blown it up or sabotaged the containment systems. They just left it running. Which meant the containment systems had been operating for 50 years without maintenance. Without anyone checking them. Without anyone ensuring that the seals were holding. Tom pulled up the current status readings from the vault monitoring systems. His hands started shaking before he'd even finished reading the data. Tom had avoided the basement for 3 weeks. It wasn't a conscious decision exactly. It was more that his instincts had been screaming at him to stay away from the lower levels. But after he'd made the connection, after he'd realized that every civilization mentioned in the logs had vanished, he knew he couldn't avoid it any longer. He had to see the vault with his own eyes. He had to know what they'd been so desperate to contain. The entrance to the basement was behind a sealed door in the main chamber, marked with symbols that Tom's translator rendered as restricted access and authorized personnel only. The door didn't respond to his commands at first. Then he found a manual override, a physical switch that hadn't been accessed in so long that it took all his strength to move it. The door hissed open, revealing a staircase that descended into darkness. Tom grabbed his helmet lamp and a portable power unit, then started down. The stairs went deeper than he expected. His footsteps echoed in the confined space, and the temperature dropped with every level. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only a few minutes, the staircase opened into another chamber. This one was different from the main facility above. It was smaller, more intimate, and absolutely covered in monitoring equipment. Screens lined every wall. Display panels flickered with data. And in the center of the chamber, taking up most of the available space, was the vault. Tom stopped dead when he saw it. It was massive. Impossibly massive. The structure was easily 40 meters across and extended upward into shadow beyond the reach of his lamp. It was constructed from a material that looked almost crystalline, shot through with veins of something that glowed with a faint, sickly purple light. Around the vault, arranged in geometric patterns, were what Tom could only describe as massive locks. Not physical locks that you could open with a key, but some kind of energy-based restraint system. Fields of shimmering light surrounded the vault, pulsing in rhythm like the beating of an enormous heart. The monitoring systems around the chamber were still active. Screens displayed data in multiple formats, most of which Tom couldn't understand. But some of it was clear enough. Power levels. Field integrity percentages. Containment status indicators. And every single one of them was flashing red. Tom approached the nearest monitor slowly, afraid to disturb anything. The readout showed a real-time view of the containment field strength. It was fluctuating wildly, jumping from 92% to 87% to 84%, then back up to 89%. The numbers weren't stable. They were trending downward. He found a data terminal and began searching for the maintenance logs specific to this chamber. The system was still running on backup power, pulling energy from what appeared to be some kind of ancient reactor buried deeper in the facility. The logs loaded slowly and Tom began reading. Most of the entries were routine. Field integrity at optimal levels. All systems nominal. Specimen remains dormant. They stretched back thousands of years, written by dozens of different species in dozens of different languages. But as Tom scrolled forward in time, the tone of the entries began to change. Specimen showing increased activity. Recommend monitoring upgrade. Field fluctuations detected. Species unaware of cause. Implementing diagnostic protocols. Specimen is aware of monitoring. It is attempting communication. Do not respond. Do not engage. Maintain silence. Tom's mouth was dry. Attempting communication. The thing in the vault wasn't just alive. It was conscious. It was aware. He continued scrolling, moving through centuries of entries toward the most recent logs. The messages became increasingly desperate as he approached the present day. Specimen testing containment boundaries. Field integrity degrading at accelerated rate. We do not have the technology to repair the damage. Requesting assistance from Protocol Council. Specimen is learning the pattern of the field. It is adapting. It is becoming more efficient at testing the weaknesses. We are concerned. The shepherd is aware. The shepherd is conscious. The shepherd is intelligent. And it knows we are here. And then the final entry. The one that made Tom's blood turn to ice in his veins. We cannot repair it. Orders received. Evacuate immediately. The shepherd is conscious. It's testing the locks. Do not return. Under no circumstances attempt to restore or maintain the containment field. Evacuate with extreme prejudice. This facility is to be abandoned. All personnel are to leave immediately. Do not attempt recovery or salvage operations. Do not attempt to understand what the shepherd is. The knowledge itself is. The entry cut off abruptly. It was unsigned and dated exactly 50 years ago, at a timestamp that matched the other evacuation records Tom had found. Someone had started typing something, had almost finished a thought, and then had simply stopped. Tom turned away from the terminal and looked back at the vault. The containment field was pulsing with that sickly purple light, and as he watched, one of the field generators sparked violently. The readings on the nearest screen dropped further, 82%, 80%, 79%. He pulled up a different display and began running diagnostic protocols on the containment system. What he found made him want to scream. The field generators were failing. Not because of some malfunction or degradation in the equipment itself, but because something was actively damaging them from inside the vault. The shepherd, whatever it was, had spent 50 years learning the structure of its prison. It understood the containment system now. It knew exactly where to apply pressure to cause maximum damage with minimum effort. Tom ran calculations, cross-referencing the current degradation rate with the field's structural integrity. He checked the power reserves, the backup systems, the emergency protocols. Everything he found told him the same thing. The containment field was failing. And based on the current rate of degradation, it would fail completely in approximately 90 days. 3 months. Tom Bradford had 3 months before whatever had terrified the galaxy itself broke free. And he was the only thing standing between it and the rest of the human population. Tom sat in the control room for 8 hours without moving. The screens around him flickered with silent alarms, red indicators pulsing in a rhythm that felt almost like a heartbeat. He stared at the containment field readings, watching the numbers creep downward with every passing minute. 78%, 75%, 72%. Each drop felt like a punch to the gut. His portable communicator sat on the desk in front of him. He could call Kepler Station right now. He could tell them what he'd found. He could explain about the vault, the records, the civilizations that had vanished. He could warn them that something was breaking free. And they would laugh at him. Or worse, they would believe him and try to weaponize it. Tom had served with military people long enough to know how they thought. They would see the shepherd as a weapon. They would see the vault as a prize waiting to be opened. They would send teams of scientists and soldiers, and they would try to understand what was inside. They would prod it and study it and experiment on it. And when they finally managed to break the containment, because they would definitely break it, they would be responsible for unleashing something that had caused the extinction of multiple advanced civilizations. Tom couldn't let that happen. He could run. That was always an option. He could pack his belongings, steal a transport, and disappear into the outer colonies. Nobody would come looking for him. A washed-out Marine with a dishonorable discharge wasn't important enough to track down. He could leave this facility behind and pretend he'd never found it. He could try to build a life somewhere else, somewhere far away from this nightmare. But as Tom sat there, staring at those red indicators, he found himself thinking about the past 20 years. 20 years of running. 20 years of hiding from his discharge, from his failures, from the mistakes that had cost him everything. He'd run from one colony to another, taking whatever work he could find, never staying anywhere long enough to build relationships or meaning. He'd been a ghost, present in body but absent from life itself. And now, faced with a choice between running again and staying, Tom Bradford made a decision that surprised him. He wasn't going to run. He reached down and powered up the main control console. The screens flickered and brightened, and the system hummed to life with a sound like something waking from a long sleep. Tom began pulling up the repair protocols, accessing the ancient maintenance manuals, and loading them into his portable terminal. He had 90 days. 90 days to learn technology that had been developed by civilizations far more advanced than humanity. 90 days to become a maintenance technician for a containment system that had held back extinction itself. It was impossible. It was insane. It was exactly what he needed to do. Tom started with the basics. He traced the power conduits that fed the containment field generators, learning how energy flowed through the system. He studied the field architecture, understanding the geometric patterns that held the shepherd in place. He examined the damaged sections, analyzing what the creature inside was doing to weaken the structure. Every hour he learned something new. Every new discovery gave him a clearer picture of the puzzle he had to solve. By the second day he'd identified the primary problem. The field generators were failing not because they were old, but because they were being actively attacked from inside the vault. The Shepherd was intelligent. It had spent 50 years studying its prison from the inside, learning the patterns, learning where to apply pressure. It had mapped the entire system and was systematically dismantling it, one generator at a time. Tom realized something that both terrified and inspired him. The Shepherd wasn't just trying to escape, it was teaching him something. Every attack it made, every pressure point it tested, it was showing Tom exactly how the system worked. The creature inside was communicating through its actions, revealing the mechanics of its own containment. On the third day, Tom attempted his first repair. He started with the least damaged generator, trying to reinforce its structural integrity using the alien technology he was beginning to understand. His hands shook as he worked, terrified of making a mistake that would accelerate the field's collapse. But as he worked, something unexpected happened. The work became meditative. The technical problem became a puzzle to solve. For the first time in 20 years, Tom felt like he was doing something that mattered. The repair worked. The generator's output increased. The containment field stabilized slightly. 71%. 72%. 73%. Tom didn't stop. He kept working through the night, moving from generator to generator, learning and repairing as he went. His hands became blistered. His eyes grew heavy. But he couldn't stop. Because with every repair, every small victory, he understood what he was becoming. He was becoming the keeper of the vault. He was becoming the guardian of something that the greatest civilizations in galactic history had deemed too dangerous to exist. He was becoming the wall between extinction and survival. On the seventh day, as Tom sat reviewing the containment field data, he noticed something unexpected. The field degradation had slowed. Not stopped, slowed. His repairs were holding. The Shepherd was still testing, still pushing, but the rate of failure had decreased dramatically. Tom did the calculations again, making sure he wasn't making a mistake. If he kept working at this pace, if he kept learning and repairing and reinforcing the system, he could keep the containment stable. Not forever, maybe. But long enough. Long enough to train someone else. Long enough to pass the knowledge on. Long enough to establish a new protocol. A human protocol for guarding something that had been guarded by aliens for 15,000 years. Tom Bradford had bought a cheap property on a remote asteroid, looking for salvage money. What he'd found instead was purpose. What he'd found was a reason to stop running and start standing. He sent no messages to the colonial authorities. He made no reports. He simply stayed in the facility and did the work that needed to be done. The work that no one else could do. The work that a broken Marine with nothing left to lose was somehow exactly qualified to do. Because someone had to keep the Shepherd locked away. And Tom Bradford had finally found something worth staying for.